When growing up, the Naruto Uzumaki Chronicles was a series of games that I ended up playing a whole lot as a kid, and to me it had really fun gameplay, and it's not the deepest, but I still think it at least had me entertained for the times I played it. And the stories are actually kind of fun and enjoyable. And I know these games are masterpieces, but again, they're still kind of fun. And of course, this video isn't going to talk about that, but with the 4th entry, I actually did see that it had a numerous amount of changes to it, and the reasoning behind it I actually found understandable, but I can say it just kind of sucks. And I'm being honest, I don't know what to call this video, or whether it's a regional difference or a version difference, since, when they brought over to the West, and I assume it's the same thing with PAL regions, we were behind in terms of the anime. The Japanese version, I believe, was sometime after the Search for Tsunade arc, while in the West, we were still in the Chunin exam arc. So this led the developers to either change stuff or cut some of the content and cutscenes to avoid spoilers, which again is understandable. I actually didn't realize the amount of stuff that was changed was quite a lot until I got a bit older, since it never really crossed my mind. One of the first things I actually did find weird as a kid was the change they made to a Rasengan, because in this game it's actually called Power Strike. This was kind of funny to me as a kid, since by the time I played the game, I was already familiar with Rasengan via the anime and other Naruto games. At most I thought it was weird, but again, I didn't really put much past the game just because I was a dumb kid and I didn't really think about it all too deeply. Another change that you could see as early as opening the game is the opening itself. More or less, they just had to cut some scenes short or simply just remove characters from certain shots because again, it was a spoiler at the time. I actually will show both openings side by side in a bit, and honestly, the Japanese version does flow a lot better because there was a lot of weird cuts and just a lot of stuff that feels empty, and again, I understand the reasoning, I just think it kind of sucks. Naruto Uzumaki Chronicles! And even on CG cutscenes, a lot of them were removed because again of the characters that were in them. If it had, say, Tsunade, Kisame, and Itachi, it just got straight up removed. They also removed the ones that had Gawa because of the fact that in the Chunin exam arc, he was still a villain, and after that, he was an ally to the Leaf, so obviously they couldn't have that. There's also a CG cutscene where it did show Gawa transforming into his Shukagu form, and of course, that one never made it here. And again, there was another one that had both Gamabuta and Mandara. It's the snake thing that Uchimaru summons. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but it got cut because I think it did show post Chunin exam Gawa, and I'll link a video to all the CG cutscenes because I think about 90 minutes of them were cut from the American version, and I kinda don't want to make this video any longer. I had been mentioning the spoiler characters quite a lot, and it's kind of weird to say that those are the spoiler characters considering at this point the original Naruto canon has finished, at least, with that stuff. I know Boruto is still going on, but, with this, they actually did have some boss fights. For example, the first Kabuto boss fight in the mission Sasuke Pursuit, it was originally Kisame, and in the mission Trouble in the Sand, it was also originally Kisame. Also on this, it was actually unknown what Gawa's motives were, since he was replaced with Kisame in this mission. And knowing this actually makes most sense in, the Japanese version, why Naruto was hospitalized, since he did fight Kisame, and the CG cutscene that follows, it actually sends Naruto fighting his dark self because Itachi ended up using the Mangekyo Sharingan, and honestly, it just makes a lot more sense again because I didn't think, Gawa was that powerful. And I did mention Naruto fighting his dark self, and yes, that is another cut boss fight. I also did mention that they had to cut out a CG cutscene with Gawa in his Hokage form, and that was actually changed to fight him in his normal form, and with the Kabuto fight right after, so that was the only part that was changed with those two boss fights, and that was in the mission where Naruto and Neji had to go to that town that was covered in mist. Another cut boss fight was a second one with the Uchimaru at the final part of the game, and I have no idea why. My only guess is because of the location it takes place in. Also on this boss, instead of Gawa helping Naruto and Sasuke, he was replaced with Kakashi. Then there's 4 more cut bosses, and this has to deal with 2 cut missions. The first one is against Shikamaru, and the other ones is against Choji, Shikamaru, and Gawa. I'll actually move on to the cut missions to explain why they were cut and why the bosses had to be cut. And with the first one, it was cut because of the story, and it involved Jiraiya ending up writing a story with Tsunade as the main character, and the location he and Naruto went to was, I believe, it's based off a thing in Japan called Fuzuku. And from what I've gathered, it's a place dedicated to a certain type of activity, and if you know anything about Jiraiya, you can probably guess what I'm talking about. The boss fight was mostly just Shikamaru not agreeing with Naruto's plan because I believe he wanted Shikamaru to just take the manuscript, which I guess it's fair, but with the mission being cut, I don't understand because, Jiraiya is a character and, he has done some really weird stuff, so I don't know why it was cut. And the other boss fight and why it was cut was because it had Gawa as a good guy, so I'm guessing, again, they couldn't really show that, so, that explains why those ones were cut. And the boss fights was mostly just because Shikamaru and Choji didn't know why Naruto was there, and Gawa didn't trust that it was actually Naruto, so that's why they all fought. There were also some in-engine cutscenes that were changed, like for example, at the hospital visit after the Trouble in the Sand mission, it was originally Tsunade, but they changed it to Shikamaru. Some other parts that were changed, like the second to last Kabuto fight, the part when they get back to Tsunade, Gawa was actually explaining the Smith stuff to Tsunade, but obviously they cut that. Another one is whenever you get a new mission, you have some parts where Naruto's talking to Tsunade, and of course with this one, they just changed it to the Hokage room being an empty room and you just select the mission. There were some other changes that were related to Tsunade, like for example, you can't choose her as a option in the monkey dice game. Another thing related to the monkey is that the whole scene with her and the gambler after Naruto gets the dice was removed because again, Tsunade hasn't existed in the English version yet. This next one relates to the Hokage doll quest, and the dolls were actually changed from looking like Tsunade to looking like the third Hokage, and this one is kind of small, but it's related to the save icon when you obviously see the save on the PS2 memory card, and actually it's the third Hokage version of the doll and not the Tsunade one. Some other parts that were changed had to be some outfits. This will be the last time I talk about Gawa, and his outfit was changed to when he was in the Chunin exam ones, and same thing with Shikamaru, where he reverts back to his Genin outfit, and yeah, Shikamaru is a Genin here instead of being a Chunin. And now we have the few final changes, so I'm just gonna go over quickly. The headshots for when characters speak were cut, and I think this was pretty weird since they didn't have to do this at all. Also, a lot of the aftermaths for missions were replaced with just paragraphs saying what had happened instead of having a cutscene. There's also no trace of the Ninetales in this game other than Naruto being able to use the Kiwi mode, because in the Japanese version he does show up in a few cutscenes. Also in the punishment mission, the one where it's done right after you finish the Search for Sasuke mission, Naruto doesn't get a reward in the Japanese version, while in the North American version he does. Another change was made to the ending, where the final cutscene is of Kakashi going on a mission with Team 7, and during the end credits, the song that is played in the original Japanese version is now an instrumental version of the English version of the song. And that's pretty much most, if not all, of the changes that was made from the Japanese version. There might be small ones here and there, like dialogue changes and whatnot, but again, this is what I could find. There were also two other really funny parts that I found, and I want to share them. One of which is Choji being able to keep the ability to enlarge his arms, because this is actually a spoiler, because he never used this until the Sasuke recovery arc. I want to imagine they just didn't want to program him with a different move, so they just kept it. At least that's my guess. And the second thing is that placing this on a timeline is really weird, because in the Western version, it's supposed to take place in between the Konoha Crush arc and the Search for Tsunade arc. That's pretty much impossible, since by this point the Third Kage is dead, and Kakashi mentioned he's alive, and there were other parts like Neji mentioning that, he fought Naruto in the training exams, but of course that technically never happened. But in the end, reading and seeing the changes made to the Western version was fun. I do hope if this game ever got re-released, it would be the Japanese version, because again, I want to see all the content and play it without having to know Japanese. And the English version always felt weird to me as a kid, because again, they did change and cut a lot of stuff, so now seeing exactly what they intended, it's just a lot nicer and makes a lot more sense. But regardless, thank you all for watching, and see you guys later.